Greetings, good evening, and welcome. You are listening or watching to Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture, where we talk about solar idealism and many other related and sometimes unrelated things. Today I'm joined by Ed and Cody to talk about the last of the three, or the first perhaps, God archetypes in this little mini series. Apologies for missing the last couple weeks. We're back at it. Life happens as we get more official and professional in our presentation of this very important material. So several weeks ago we talked about the Lord of the Earth, who is this God archetype who takes many forms in many different religious traditions, who basically maintains, cultivates, and preserves the good things within a given perimeter, within a society. And then a couple weeks ago, we talked about the striker, who is in many ways the simplest and in some ways the most attractive of the archetypes. He's the warrior who guards the perimeter. But today we're going to be talking about the Father, who is one of the more mysterious, primal, and I don't want to say the most important, but he's sort of the foundation, which is why I chose this William Blake painting to depict him. He's the man in the sky with the compass drawing the lines. He sets the perimeter. He establishes what is us and them. He draws that perimeter and creates boundaries. He creates order. In the Christian Jewish tradition, this is Yahweh. But he take in Greek tradition, this is Zeus. In Nordic culture, you could say kind of Odin. Nordic culture the Nordic pantheon gets a little tricky. There's some Thor Odin questions there, but it's kind of Odin. It's mostly Odin. And yeah, we're here to discuss that. Feel free to ask questions if you have questions about it. But I thought we would just sort of talk about different examples of fathers, what the role of the father archetype is, how it plays out in our emulation of this archetype, and maybe some unique challenges and expressions of and for the father.
Sounds good.
So Ed, you're given your background, could you give us, I think many of the people who will be listening to this will be already familiar with Zeus. They'll be familiar with Thor and Odin, but I think a lot of people are less familiar with the Hindu, Indic, and more Eastern versions of this father. Can you give us a rundown of some examples, because it's not necessarily just one, of the father archetype in the Hindu world?
Well, I mean, you can go back a little farther than the Hindu world, to their what they consider their core, foundational text, the Vedas. In Rig Veda, which is that one text that we do read and appreciate a lot in the Order of Fire. The father really would be Varuna and Mitra and Aryaman. There are three you could say solar deities, but it makes me think of an example that I like to give to when I'm talking about solar idealism, that one of the best examples on earth of the father isn't a dad, because that's more of a Lord of the Earth thing, but it's the king. And Varuna, Mitra, Aryaman, they're all hymned about as often called kings. But they are, they're the will behind things, the reason behind things, the reasoning behind things, and they govern human relationships, laws on earth, social contracts. But when you think of a king, The king, I don't want to say things like cause of all causes or something like that, but the Father is the executive function, and that's the role of those three deities. Other deities are sometimes spoken of as a father, or metaphorically, the poetry describes them as a father. That could be Agni, that could be Indra, but those three deities are the main ones. But yeah, the king. It's like the father is the executive function.
Okay,
Which
that's an interesting. That's an interesting phrase, executive function, because that's also a neurological phrase.
Exactly.
It refers to the ability to decide and execute actions. We might talk about logos within the Platonic Trinity there.
And I believe that's a direct quote from Fire in the Dark as well, when Agnitor Jack, when he distinguishes using logos and reason to define the perimeter. And while the Father is not the fire, he's the one closest to it in establishing the line.
Yes.
And so it's the reasoning behind the actions of the other archetypes. Like, you think about a king can be sitting there, he's behind a veil of sorts. No one gets in there, not just anybody, right? And the king may also be a worldly father as well, but then has all these other, this type of management. But the king can sit there and do absolutely nothing but say, I should like very much that there be a grand ziggurat. Let me know when you have finished, right? But no physical action is taken, but then things happen in the world.
So he makes things happen indirectly.
Like our own executive function. It's not something really that is tangible. Our executive function gives way to getting shit done in a timely way, in an orderly way, in a way that makes sense.
It sort of orders the muscles to move, and then the muscles do the thing.
Yeah.
Now, the neurological comparison is fun, but there's some nuance here, because the other two components in Plato's sort of tripartite soul are also mental, right? The appetites are also mental. The spirit is also mental and desires things. So the executive function works in the deciding element, but it also, as Jack has jumped in to say, management. It manages these things. It contains them, restrains them, says, yes, we'll go this far in our desire, but we'll stop after our third candy bar. We don't go beyond that. We don't go, past a second hit of, I probably shouldn't say street drug names on
Kratom,
but yeah,
yeah. But then you mentioned desire. Things. You mentioned desire, and desire is a major component of flourishing, of production. So it's like it's like the source of the seed.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
If that makes sense.
It creates order from our own mental impulses.
Yeah.
But the Father also goes beyond that. That's a very internal framework, which is very valid. But the Father also creates order out of the external environment. He also shapes the land into a perimeter, into a space that is suitable to create the world of his own design, whether that's a small camp or a house or a whole city, or a framework for understanding the world. Perhaps there's many layers and dimensions. It's a mode of thinking that applies to the external world and to the internal world at a variety of different scales.
And that plays out in a lot of creation myths.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the pushing apart of heaven and earth, you know, to create a world within the mid space where we live.
Right. We've got a few interesting comments here that might test our management and restraint. Hindu and Indian man like sexy time with goats, says Nick, who also says black people say they was kings. So we can practice controlling our executive function here in what we say, which is a big part of the father archetype. But as far as black people saying they was kings, I mean, in any given society, there was a king. But so it's it's one of these funny lines that gets used in a few different political directions. But to begin, I like to go back to Sparta and Lycurgus, who begins with like the mentality for running a city, begins with the mentality of running a house. Right? He was presented with, well, we should try democracy like those Athenians, and he says, "Would you run your house with your children like a democracy?" No, you would not. There is and again, this goes back to the whole scaling thing of like, can you at least, maybe you can't control a whole kingdom, but can you at least control yourself? Which goes back to, you know, what you say, and maybe I'll try to be better about this. What you read of the comments on offer, because not all of them are worth addressing. 9 has another comment, perhaps not worth addressing here. But that internal frame for management, design, vision, and poetic inspiration is often the starting point to develop this facility, and also to develop an ability to see the genius and skill in other great lawgivers. Because the embodiments of this archetype in history are, I think, the great lawgivers in history. You could look at Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. You could look at Lycurgus, who I mentioned, Solon. You could look at Moses. You could look at Muhammad as examples of these lawgivers. And there are many, many others across time and place. Isn't there a famous frieze somewhere in Washington, D.C. of like the great lawgivers in history? I think it was commissioned at around the time of the founding fathers. I'll have to double check that.
Yeah.
But that's the basic idea of the father archetype. He's he's an architect. He draws boundaries, and there are real metaphysical challenges that the father runs into, because before you can get to what is moral and what is immoral in the framing of your laws, you have to ask, what even is morality? You know, that's not a sort of question that the striker or the Lord of the Earth has to really contend with. It's not, they just say, oh, this is like good and this is bad. But like, what is goodness? What is justice, perhaps? Those are like foundational questions that give everybody else the language by which they even approach these issues and life. And the challenge of creating language is a big challenge for the father. And it's an internal one as well. I am a big fan of Scott Adams, and one of his more recent books, his most recent book, and arguably his most successful book, is called Reframe Your Brain, which is all about giving you more productive and useful language to mentally talk about certain kinds of experiences and certain kinds of problems. And it's presented as a language replacement protocol. You're used to thinking of this kind of scenario in this language. Instead, think of it in this other language. And that shift in the language you use to mentally talk about a problem changes how you approach it. It changes the spirit that you bring to it, and it changes how you live, essentially. It changes who you are. So that's a big part of it as well.
What's the name of that book again?
It's called Reframe Your Brain.
Interesting.
For those of you who might be listening to this who don't know, Scott Adams is a trained hypnotist and is, I would say, there's a certain number of people in the world who are wizards in the way that they influence things indirectly with these language spells, essentially. Scott Adams is one of those people. You know, there's maybe 24 or so good ones at work. I'm pretty sure he's one of the good ones. And he says every once in a while, once in a generation, there'll be an absolute, like, I think Scott Adams called him like a sorcerer, someone who is just a once in a generation linguistic rhetorical talent. I don't know if I don't know who any examples of that would be. Scott Adams is not at that level, but he's above most, and he is very good at he would just say writing, but that's kind of underselling what he's doing with hypnotism. Jack asks, isn't there a kind of therapy that people get certified in? It has to do with changing words to change perceptions. I can't think of the name right now. That might be, is that cognitive behavioral therapy? It might be something else. I don't know.
It's probably got that in there.
CBT.
No,
there's a lot of variations on that. But it's a great starting place to be able to reframe things like that. But it takes a whole different level of skill to not just to look at something and say, this is wrong, this could be improved, but to look at a blank canvas, to look at the void or the wilderness, and to come up with these things from nothing or from almost nothing. And that's like the sort of ideal, the sort of highest level of the father archetype, to be able to create ex nihilo, essentially. And it's not a skill most people are ever going to be able to develop to a very serious level, but it's something we can all get marginally better at to prove towards once we've mastered the sort of Lord of the Earth and Striker base skill set.
What are some of the can either of you guys think
I'm gonna check out
other ways that the
it is CBT,
that the father can be experienced directly in the world, like being a dad. Like you two both have kids, right? And we often talk about, I definitely don't have kids, so I understand the father archetype totally separate from the idea of managing a family. Is it something that you think about when you think about the archetypes in your daily life at home?
A little bit. I mean, there's definitely some cross application, but I think that becoming a literal father as a path to understanding the father archetype is less direct than a lot of people would imagine it to be, because so much of parenting is you've already been instructed on like the right way to do it. There's already so many paths about like of what you are supposed to do. And to really come up with your own idea or to make an executive decision, say, no, this is what we're doing. I mean, you practice some of that energy, in how you address your children. Say, no, it is bedtime now. um, uh, but unless you are willing to sometimes challenge some of the existing orthodox opinion about parenting, it's it is a route, but it's a less direct route than I think many people imagine it to be. Although you still bear the responsibility for it, and maybe that's the first step. As long as you're really aware of it. But I'm not sure every parent does fully grasp the weight of responsibility that's on them. So I think that would be a first step. I think anyone who is like a foreman on a job site or is in any kind of leadership position where they are really held accountable and responsible for whether their plan works or doesn't work. That's obviously not like creating their own system exactly, but when you are a father in the archetypal deific sense, it is assumed that you understand the consequences of what you do, for better or for worse. And I think that understanding of the weight of responsibility and becoming comfortable with other people's financial success, their safety and their lives, resting on your making correct decisions, and the way you go about resolving problems. That is a path, I think, to understanding what it means to be the father, and not just throwing paint on a canvas lightly, if that makes sense.
And a family is managing relationships like any kind of relationships, and it's more challenging when you know because you're in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something internal that is external from the
Yes.
situation looking at it?
So I think like you could break down relationships equally between Lord of the Earth and Father. Lord of the Earth relationship maintenance is like we have this ritual where we sit down together once a week and watch a TV show together, or every once in a while we go out on a date, or I get her flowers, or these little ordinary things that maintain the relationship, if that makes sense. The father version of relationship thing is like creating the vision of this is what we're doing together. This is it's you and me against the world, right? Like that kind of narrative. The like we're going to live in a house out in the countryside. We're both going to work really hard for the next 10 years, and this is what we're going to accomplish, and we're going to accomplish it together. And like that kind of vision is immensely powerful for a marriage. It creates excitement, it creates interest, it creates a sense of purpose, it creates a sense of fulfillment and accomplishment, sometimes for yourself, sometimes for the other person. And if you can practice that with your partner or even with friends, you can do a lot, and you can bring a lot more than just this. I don't want to say shallow maintenance stuff, but the sort of there's nothing to maintain if there isn't that grand vision, if that makes sense. And I think conventional marriage has provided some of that, because we have to outsource some of our grand vision to some degree. We inherit some of it in our culture. But if you have the power to create that on your own, it's a tremendously powerful tool, again, for yourself as well as for other people. Oh, Jack says it's NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. That is, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's like changing thought patterns. NLP
You
is
write
like,
down what are your thoughts? Like, how do you
yeah.
feel? I feel so anxious. And then you write down, what are you thinking at that time? I'm a bad person
Mhm.
and nobody loves me. What's the real thing?
Right.
Lots
Whereas
of people love me.
NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is more like, I'm going to inject a thought into your head with a linguistic hypodermic needle by using a word with a double entendre that you don't even like register as being there.
Sounds like fun.
And I'm going to there's a great British mentalist named Darren Brown who's like a master of this. I can get you to think of something without saying it, but by saying words that sort of get you to think of this thing on your own. It's like some black magic stuff, but there are positive ways to do it. And the NLP advocates usually frame it as like ways of programming yourself, which I'm sure it can have value in doing that.
So our this symbol here, our symbol for the Father archetype is a solar eye, right? So in a sense, that brings out another aspect when you think about the sun and an eye, two different things put together. And I think about it, the sun shines on. So there's an aspect of the Father that's like maybe a little bit different than some of the things we've talked about. The idea, think of the sun shining equally on everyone, regardless of morals or what their situation is.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking about that. Like, what does that say? What is the quality? What is the deeper meaning?
So think of the Lion King, right? There's Pride Rock, but then there's the elephant graveyard, right? This dark place. But the king, the Mufasa who draws that boundary, has to have some degree of familiarity with the dark as well as the light in order to know where to draw the line. So to be a good father in the archetypal sense, you have to have a body of experience that is fairly broad. You have seen much of the world, including parts of the world that you are going to exclude. This is like Lycurgus's journey to all these other kingdoms to learn how other people run things before he returned to Sparta and said, okay, this is how we're going to do things based on what I've learned. And I think the sort of egalitarianism of observation under the sun is the prerequisite to being able to draw lines, and establish boundaries well.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing. We talk a little bit within the order about this idea of the Father in darkness, as opposed to the Father as the public often sees him. Because the Father in darkness he should not necessarily be showing himself exploring dark subjects. Like if you're going to just bring it back to my world, like philosophy, if you're going to explore, like give good arguments against antinatalism, you have to actually understand antinatalism. You have to kind of go into it. And when you expose yourself to that, some of that does get internalized. And even if only for a little while, maybe not for a little while, when you come to really understand antinatalists as they understand themselves, which is what it takes to be able to completely reject that. That exploration is not something to necessarily share. That's not something to present yourself going through. What you find and what you're able to say on the other side, to share, that was the purpose of the exploration, perhaps, that you share. But there has to be a degree of, what's the right word? Decorum, gravitas. You have to have authority as a father. And you lose authority when you are constantly changing your mind, or hemming and hawing, or if it seems like you are dabbling in too many things. So there is some value in a degree of secrecy in your explorations, not sharing your heart in every moment, no matter how strongly social media might tempt you to share every twist and turn of your thought. And this is something I struggle with. And I think that is an aspect of the father that is maybe underappreciated.
When, to be fair, your least thought out reel is still probably more thought out than 98% of the internet. So I wouldn't judge yourself too harshly on that.
A lot of the reels I've been posting are just like distillations of blog posts that I wrote years ago, right? But not every blog post is worth sharing. I'll say that. Yeah, I wrote a lot of blog posts that I would not share again. And I think many people who write feel the same way. They're like, oh yeah, I don't really want to share that one. Then again, we're not always our own best judge. Tchaikovsky very famously hated his Nutcracker Suite, which is a phenomenal piece. So who knows?
Side point. When we were talking about the solar eye and that vision, and then you mentioned secrecy. Varuna in Rig Veda as father, many of the poems talk about his spash, which is spies. Yeah. Spash is one of the predecessors to our English word spy.
Interesting. Just like Odin and his ravens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Has spies.
Yeah, because and that's the other part of the solar eyes. The father has to see things, has to gain experience in order to draw these distinctions. And the son sees everything, but the earthly examples of these men often have ways of finding things out too. Supposedly George Washington was quite a successful spy master. I'm no historical expert on the matter, but that's what I'm told.
If there was something, we can assume he did it really good. Pretty much.
Yeah. He was also a land surveyor. So
if you've ever been to his house, the Mount Vernon house, the dining room is just, it's pretty amazing. The amount of detail and all the colors, and he even made a great dining room.
He's our man. He's our father.
So, every guy, every bull has his own, sort of nature proclivities and, leans. I like to think of the archetypes often as some sort of, not quite a triangle, but they're moving. Like the father is always at the top, but they're kind of moving around in a guy's life.
Yes.
Regardless of which one is sort of like, home base. But, when you think of the father, a lot of guys have altars. They do meditations. I have an altar here, and there's something on there that represents each archetype, and I'm just wondering, like, how far, like, the word, maybe it's because I was raised Catholic, but the word father, like, it brings out a certain sort of sense of reverence.
Yes.
Like, okay, you're at the top. And when I am working with my altar or doing a solar meditation, like, when it comes to the archetypes, I think of the father within me as, all of the things that we've discussed, sort of the decider, not the doer, but the decider. And there is a sort of a sense of reverence, and I'm wondering how far is it necessary to go with that, and is it just personal?
I think a lot of that reverence can be I mean, a lot of that at a very basic social level is just inherited. Like, you pick up that other people revere this person, so you do too. But the reason these other people are revering the father is because they have begun to understand the weight of responsibility of drawing these boundaries. And once you understand that weight, it is really hard not to respect someone who has made a serious and genuine attempt at doing that. I've been on, like, to bring it down to a microcosmic level, which is its own fun language. I've been on job sites where the foreman on, like, a school or a hospital, there's so much stuff that they are responsible for, and have to keep straight. They have to refer back to the blueprints, to the design, sometimes modifying that. And the good foreman, like, if they're on your job site, you're like, there's this sense of, oh, thank goodness they're here, nothing can go wrong. There's a sense of safety because they won't lead you astray, if that makes sense. Other foremen, maybe you're like, oh, we'll see where this goes. But I think if you understand, once you've come to get a taste of the weight of and the breadth of what the father is responsible for, heavy rests the crown, as they say. It is very hard not to revere, or at the very least respect that kind of person.
And someone is certainly, you can go through what you just described in the absence of other people. It can be simply about your own direction, your own blueprint, your own personal, your own personal blueprint. Of course, other people are going to be affected, but those types of decisions can be a completely internal thing about your own, the next step you need to take, or a change that you need to make, especially if it's one that's heavy, that requires, that sort of heaviness of actually experiencing the gravity of what needs to be done.
And I think once you see that, it becomes clear that many people cannot be kings. It is a certain kind of person who can be king. Nietzsche has a lot of fun writing about this. He thinks socialism was born when the Industrial Revolution happened, and these industrial managers became extremely wealthy, and the workers were like, oh, these guys with fat fingers, with pudgy fingers, he describes, can be king. Well, I guess anybody can be king. Let's create some chaos, roll the dice, and see if we might wind up on top. And thus socialism was born. The true king, we can say, is a unique type, or it's something that it takes a while to graduate to if you're not that type. And there's a very funny poem by Robert Frost called "How Hard It Is to Keep from Being King When It's in You and in the Situation." And the poem follows, I read it just by chance a couple months ago. The poem follows a king and his son, the prince, who decide that being king is too burdensome, and so they abdicate. They leave the throne behind. They flee in the middle of the night in disguise, and they have no money. So the father, the old king, sells himself into slavery to give his son some money. And so this man who was once a king is now a slave to some, family somewhere. But because he just knows things and knows how to get things done, he can't help it. He ends up rising back up through the ranks and becomes essentially a king again, despite having tried to flee from that role. It's obviously not everybody.
No, I mean, it was always considered unique. I mean, that's why it was divinely sanctioned.
Mm-hmm.
It was,
right.
if someone was the king, it wasn't just, it was the gods were behind it.
Yeah,
And they were living.
The true divine right of kings is it's not the gods have decreed it, but the gods made me such that I am supposed to be king, or that Fred is supposed to be king. And when you meet someone like that, you're like, oh, I would fight for him, or I would work for him. I would be very happy to work for him. Like he would make me feel good to be a servant for, if that makes sense. I would follow him. And like you see this every once in a while in based movies, like the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, where Boromir is dying and he's saying, I would have served you to Aragorn, and you can't watch that scene too many times or you'll cry, but it's like, that's the sense of being around that kind of person, I think. And to be a father is, in some sense, to develop that energy in yourself that makes other people act that way around you, which is the takedown to the blogger Vox Day in his talk about the sociosexual hierarchy. I assume you guys have heard of this. The alphas, the deltas, the gammas, omegas, the sigmas, and so forth. His critique of the gammas personality is that they oftentimes, this type of person imagines that they're a secret king, or they're perhaps in another language, it would be an Evolian aristocrat of the soul, right? Exactly. I'm an aristocrat. I'm a lord or a king deep inside. This is what Nick was referring to earlier. We was kangs, not just among black people, but among white people as well, and all sorts of other people who imagine that, but for the unjust world I've been born into, I would have been this king, right? And how other people treat you is the tell against that, really. No. You would never be king if other people are not willing to follow you, and that's really, other people's willingness to follow you is a central, maybe the central component of being a good father. It's being it's having authority by virtue of being authoritative, rather than by trying to make up for it by being authoritarian.
Well, it's not unrighteous dominion at that point. It's actual leadership is the difference.
Yes, precisely. Real leadership makes other people want to follow you. It doesn't just seize command because you have the power to do that. Exactly.
Yeah. And because it multiplies in the business sense, the subjects or the employees or the coworkers are multiplied in their, in their abilities. They're able to be, the best versions of themselves, and then, in Yeah, you get it. You get
Yeah,
what
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's like what the
in
logos
kingdoms,
does.
that's what I was going to say. Like things multiply, for the people. There's more wheat. There's more opportunity.
Precisely. And at the personal level, this is like if you have a good logos, if you have a good executive function and sense of balance and control over yourself, you will reward your spirit. You will reward your appetites. You will get the opportunities for combat. You will get the sex. You will get the good food. You will give yourself the good things, just not so much that it becomes pathological. Jack says, one of the interesting things about the Odin story is that it highlights his struggles to find answers, which is why he's a really good example of the Father in Darkness. Yes. Many deific stories of the Father archetype are fact-finding missions. There's one famous story of Zeus and Apollo are uncertain about the degree of piety in a particular town. So they go down disguised as mortals and they go from house to house seeing if they'll be taken in by anybody. And no one takes them in except an older couple who says, takes them in, houses them and lodges them and treats them very well. And then Zeus and Apollo reveal themselves and they say, we'll give you whatever you like as a reward for demonstrating good xenia, unlike the rest of your town. And they opt to stay together forever. So Zeus turns these two old people who are, probably a few years away from death anyways, into trees where the roots were intertwined and they're like alive together for forever, which is kind of romantic story. But it was a fact-finding mission to see like what is going on down here. And yeah, Odin is, of course, the famous wanderer going around from place to place. And, you have to. It goes back to like you have to know things. You have to begin with experience, and a lot of that experience is acquired as a Lord of the Earth or as a striker, and then the Father is something that you graduate into, usually on the other side of being a striker. Understanding the weight of life and death more so than just, putting buildings up or keeping the bees alive or what have you. So that's a pretty good covering of things. I'm curious if you guys have anything else to add. We're coming up on 50 minutes here, which is not the longest of live streams, but it's a pretty good coverage of the topic, and there's only so far we can go for people who haven't read Fire in the Dark.
Yeah.
And if you have, well, you probably know most of this already. You guys have anything else to add?
I don't.
No, I think we covered, like you said, a good overarching, because I feel like there are probably several directions we could easily go down for another hour.
Yeah.
And that's not the not the point here tonight.
Yeah. I think one good like practical takeaway is it is very valuable to have some of these Father abilities, at least to some degree. The power of naming, the power of vision, both being able to see and also being able to create a vision for yourself and for others. But you're not going to be able to do that well without experience, which means it's probably very important to not waste too much time in your early life, in your teens and 20s. Go out and have experiences, try things, join the military, or maybe don't do that right now, but like, go out and have those experiences so that you can have the experience to build from and apply to this Father role should it be needed.
But isn't that advice that Heck Volunteer gives? He says that young men should buy a ticket to another country and not buy a ticket to return until
A
they
one-way ticket, yes. And he
and
did
become
that.
homeless. and beg for money.
Yep.
Yeah, or
But
to
because
another country, to at least another place. In his case, he moved literally to the other side of the globe. I, moved, I mean, America's a big place. I guess I did something like that several times. I was homeless, kind of technically, for in a couple different places. Some of those were the best times of my life. They were freaking awesome. Like living out of a 1986 4Runner or in a semi truck. That was an adventure. I didn't know what I was getting into.
yeah.
Now I know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I did
I think,
similar stuff in my 20s, just like bought tickets, and
yeah,
it was well before 9/11, so you really could buy a one-way ticket, or you used to be able to get open-ended tickets, and I went
yeah.
to
You
fucking
can just go. You don't
far-flung
need a
places.
plane
Yeah,
ticket. You can rent, get a car or hop on a bus,
bus.
hop on a Greyhound, And I think this sounds like extreme advice, but I know in my personal life, at least two young men who are in their mid 20s to early 30s who never did that, who always kind of, for lack of a better phrase, played it safe. They always went for what was the most economically rational kind of decision. And there's an absence of a certain kind of life experience that is not to say that this should be at the top of their priority, but which women really pick up on the absence of that. And like I think other men pick up on it too. That there's something that changes about your energy when you have been places and had truly no one else to rely on. You're looking at things not necessarily from rock bottom, but at the level of bedrock. What do I value? What is important to me? And I think it is very valuable to have that kind of experience at least once. And that won't build itself into a full-on manifestation of the father archetype, in your mid 20s, but it is important to have that as a sort of ground, as a sort of reference point. Me using freaking electrical analogies for when you're in your, late 30s and 40s and later on in life.
Later on, I know about later on, but yeah, experience like knowing the world.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
that makes me think of the Odyssey, and
Yeah.
now my mind is gone blank. The guy, what is the character? His name, the old guy who knows the world.
Oh, Nestor. Yes.
Yeah,
And who,
Uh,
I mean, Odysseus himself, who traveled to many cities of men and came to know their minds.
and many
Odysseus is the perfect example. And
women
his,
too. He traveled to some
yes, and
pretty serious lady
his
examples.
father role is illustrated so beautifully in the olive bed, which, like, you could say, oh, that's carpentry, right? But the way it's described is like it's like an architect's design, because it describes the roots of the bed, and how he, of course, laid out the lines and drew up the plans for it and everything himself. That is a metaphor for the vision he brought to the marriage with his wife, which he never abandoned, despite having many opportunities to do so. And that vision was probably a big part of why his wife never betrayed him.
Yeah,
So
the carpentry is the Lord of the earth, but the conception of
right,
that is the Father.
exactly. And his travels abroad are both a source of and an expression of his own latent kingliness. As the old saying, who knows of England who only England knows. I think that's a perfect sort of poetic description of the sort of energy of the father. So I think it's probably a good place to end it. unless you guys have anything else to add there. I think we covered it pretty well. So thanks everyone for listening, either on YouTube or Spotify. And take care. We'll check it back in next week. We've got some interesting ones coming up. We will be discussing Christianity. Not next weekend, and not the weekend after that, but the weekend after that with a real in the flesh Christian. So stay tuned for that. Should be a good time.
Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.